Maggie Klein, welcome to the Breakfast Nook. So, why do I love Dragonlance? So, I was aware of Dragonlance from a young age. I saw the books when I was a teenager in the local Stars and Stripes in Heidelberg, Germany when I was a kid. And I also saw people reading them on buses and trips and stuff like that. And I always remember the cover with Katrina on it and going, wow, that's so cool. But I always thought it was a guy. It turns out to be a female. But, anyways. But I didn't read the books because, well, I wasn't really into fantasy. I was more into comic books, and I'd rather read comic books. And I never did pick up the Dragonlance comic book series because, well, it didn't interest me that much. Flash forward 30 years later, and I'm at Wizards of the Coast. So I was working at Wizards of the Coast with Dragons and Flagoons, a YouTube channel here on YouTube that specializes in D&D content. And he's a very good content creator, and you should check him out. So anyways... So we got to talking one day, and he was like, yeah, I'm starting up a new campaign. I'm going to run the new Dragonlance adventure that had just come out. And I was like, well, I'm kind of interested in being in your Dragonlance campaign. And he was like, well, okay, sure, I'll add you. And so he added me to his Discord server, and I started playing his Dragonlance campaign. Flash forward a few weeks of playing, and he's like, and Dragon and Flagoon comes to me and says, you really need to start reading the Dragonlance novels. Well, I was like, yeah, it's a book. I want to read comic books instead. So I didn't really take him up on it. Eventually, I bought the first book in the Chronicles and was like, yeah, I'll read it. And he was like, read it. And then I read one chapter, and I was like, yeah, it's okay, but I'll read it later. So I didn't really read it, and then Dragon Flagoon was getting after me about reading even more, and I said, no. And then eventually, I just told him I read one chapter and got bored with the book and forgot about it. Well, back in March, I got an invite to come out to Wizards of the Coast headquarters. So I had to fly from Austin to Seattle on a trip. Well, when I fly, I don't have internet access because I'm not going to pay $9 for internet access. So I'm forced to use whatever's on my phone. Well, instead of reading comic books, I decided to read the Dragonlance novel, mostly just to get Dragons and Flagoons off my back. And also, I felt, it's something I could do while flying. So I read the first book in the Chronicles. And I loved it. It is a great story. It's mostly an adventure set in... It's basically a campaign adventure that got turned into a series of 3 novels. So I read the first book, finished that, and told Dragon Flagoon it was really good, and I'm going to read the next book. So on the flight back, I bought the second and third books of the Chronicles series and started reading them on the flight back. And I got so enamored with it because Dragonlance is one of these stories where D&D is kind of different. So there isn't like paladins and architectors and things like that. Even though in the Dragonlance campaign I'm playing a paladin, which doesn't exist in the Dragonlance universe. It's really only gnomes, elves, rangers, fighters, knights of Solamnia, which are the fighters, magic users, and other things. They don't have the deep classes because they didn't really develop them. But what made me fall in love with the book was just the way its pacing was and the way the story drew my fantasy, drew me in with the adventure. I was hooked after the first book, and I just loved the whole adventure, how they had to deal with all this adversity and how they failed at times and then succeeded, and slowly over time it evolved into a story that ended kind of in a strange way. Definitely, though, I have to say my favorite character is Tasselhoff. I love the Kinder, even though I hate playing with Kinders because they steal everything. But it was great fun, and I really enjoyed it. Well, then I got back to Austin, and I was like talking to Dragons and Flagoons again, and he was like, well, now you need to read the next series of books. I was like, what's that? And he goes, The Legends. So this was the book that really drove home my love for this, because it featured the stories of Rassilin and Cameron, and I love Cameron. Cameron's a cool character, and I'm not a real Rassilin fanatic, but I love Rassilin because he's so anti-hero that he's not a bad guy per se, but he's not a good guy either, really. He's kind of selfish and self-centered. And the Legends really explores the deep relationship between Rasslin and Cameron. And it also was a time traveling series, so it featured them going back to the Cataclysm, which is so cool. That's one thing I love about the Dragonlance universe was at the start of the Chronicles, the world had been in chaos for 300 years after the gods had left and destroyed the city. And they explore those themes of the Cataclysm in both books. But now we're at the time before the Cataclysm. We're going to get to read about the Cataclysm, which was really cool because I did visit the city in the first series of books, but that is something that you have to read the books to understand how they did that. So I was like really fascinated. The whole Fisher King thing intrigued me, and just the whole how clerics exist. Because in the Dragonlance world, clerics don't exist. They were all gone after right before the Cataclysm. They all vanished. And now they're returning in the Chronicles because we chronicled the first cleric, and I love the clerics. I play a cleric in Pathfinder usually when I play characters, but I also love playing paladin, so I chose to play paladin. So anyways, then it chronicles Rasslin's adventures through time as he journeys through the battlefield, stuff like that. Then it has a bunch of stuff about the dwarves, which I love dwarves. I played dwarves in Warhammer Fantasy when it was a game, no longer a game. Sorry to see it gone, but I love slamming blocks. So it was great to see the dwarves and the great dwarven battle between the two dwarven tribes, and then how it ends with a whole, well, I've given enough spoilers now, so I'm not going to ruin that aspect of the book. So I fell in love with Legends and really just, I read them, I inhaled them. I read them in a day each and then finished them up. So then I was like, Dragons Legends was left. So he said, well, read the Next Generation series and also read the in-between books in between Chronicles. Because in Chronicles, events happen, but they don't really talk about them in the book. There's a whole adventure in the Ice Kingdoms, and there's a whole adventure with the dwarves that just kind of starts the book off in the Legends. Actually, in the second book in Chronicles. So I was like, I gotta read these. Well, this is where I stopped reading Dragonlance books because, well, I didn't find them very entertaining because I already knew the story kind of from reading the Chronicles, and they didn't hold my sway, so I stopped reading the Dragonlance books. But reading the first 6 books really cemented my love for Dragonlance because it's just such a well-written adventure and then just really a well-written adventure fantasy story that is a must-read. You should read those 6 books if you're a fantasy fan. So that's why I love Dragonlance. Also, adding to my love for Dragonlance is the campaign I'm currently in. So we're still working on the Dragonlance Adventure book, and we're about a third way in. And what makes that adventure so much fun is now that I have read the books, I understand some of the references. Like there's a reference to Lord Soth, and some of the characters from the Legends has appeared in my adventure, and it really fantasized and really is fun to play in a world where I love the world and love identifying with it. So yeah, Dragonlance is now one of my favorite fantasy books. Will I read the other Dragonlance books? Probably at some point, but right now I'm reading a book by C.S. Freeman, her latest book that just came out. I'm personal friends with C.S. Freeman, so she said I just put a boom bag out, and I bought it because I wanted to support my friend. And I have a flight this winter to see my mom, and I'll definitely be reading C.S. Freeman's book, and possibly the other Dragonlance books. I kind of want to read the Minotaur series too because I'm fascinated by Minotaurs, and Dragonlance is just such a fun fantasy setting. It's the concept of the elves, the concept of the dwarves, and the fact that the dwarves fight amongst each other based upon their types and stuff is very interesting. The gnomes are crazy fun to read, and it's just a fun read. So give it a read.